The fire in the great hall of Winterfell burned strong, crackling in the hearth as snow fell quietly outside. Catelyn Stark stood near the window, arms crossed over her chest, her brows pulled together in deep thought. Her eyes weren't watching the snow. They were watching a boy, Theon Greyjoy, laughing with Robb, sparring in the yard like a young wolf, trying to fit in with the pack. Catelyn had always been quiet around the boy. He wasn't her son. He wasn't even really part of the family. He was a hostage, taken after Balon Greyjoy's failed rebellion, a reminder to the Iron Islands to never rise again. But as the years passed, everyone had begun to forget that. Everyone, except her. That night, after the children were asleep and the fires were dying low, she turned to Ned. "Ned," she began softly, but there was a sharpness in her tone. "I need to speak to you about Theon." Ned looked up from his maps, the same maps he'd studied 100 times. His face, as always, was calm. "What about him? You treat him like one of our own," she said, stepping closer. "You let him train with Robb, eat at our table, sleep under our roof. And now you're saying you want to make him Robb's squire." "Aye," Ned nodded. "He's a good boy, Catelyn. He needs a purpose. But he is not one of ours," she said firmly. "He's the son of a man who still dreams of burning our lands. You know what the Ironborn are like, Ned. They're not like us. They take what they want, not out of need, but out of pride. I've seen the way he watches Robb, the way he speaks of the sea. He may smile at us now, but his heart lies across the water." Ned sighed, tired of wars, tired of distrust, but he listened. He always listened to her. "He's only a boy," he said again, quieter this time. "He's grown up with our sons. He's never caused trouble." "Yet," Catelyn said coldly, "because he's waiting for the moment he can be something more than just a guest. You forget what men like his father teach their sons. Blood calls to blood, Ned. One day, that blood will burn for salt and iron." There was silence for a while, just the sound of the wind howling through Winterfell's old stones. "I will think on it," Ned said finally. But Catelyn knew that meant he was already thinking differently. And the next morning, Theon noticed. The warm smile Ned usually gave him was still there, but something had changed behind the eyes. When he asked about squiring for Robb, Ned simply said, "Not yet." That day, Theon watched Robb from a distance as he trained with a different squire, Jon Snow. Jealousy flared up in his chest like wildfire, but he kept his face still. Later that night, Theon sat alone, staring at the flames. For the first time in years, he remembered the sound of waves crashing against Pike. He remembered his father's voice telling him the Starks were not family, that he was only ever a pawn to them, a hostage. And now he felt it. For the first time, truly felt it. He was not one of them, and something inside him hardened. Theon didn't sleep well that night. He lay in the dark, listening to the distant howl of wolves outside Winterfell's walls. For the first time, they didn't sound like protection. They sounded like a warning. He thought of all the nights he had spent with Robb, laughing, training, pretending they were brothers. And now, a single word from Lady Catelyn had pulled a thread loose, and he could feel everything slowly unraveling. At breakfast, Robb sat beside him like usual, but Theon could tell something had shifted, not in Robb's eyes, but in everyone else's. Maester Luwin nodded politely to Theon, but didn't ask him about his studies like he normally did. Even Bran, the cheerful little boy who always ran to greet him, clung instead to Catelyn's side. And Catelyn? She barely looked at him. When she did, it was not with warmth. It was with cold distance, not anger, not hatred, just calculation. As if she was watching a wolf outside her gate, deciding whether it would bite. That week, things only got worse. Theon was no longer invited to the war councils, not even as a listener. He trained less with Robb and more with the younger boys, who didn't respect him the way Robb did. He noticed how the guards looked at him now, as if remembering he wasn't one of them, just a reminder of a war long past. Ned, for his part, tried to remain neutral, but Theon could feel it. Even in Lord Stark's fair judgments, there was now a careful distance, a crack in the trust. One evening, Theon stood alone in the godswood. The old gods watched him in silence as the weirwood tree bled from its pale bark. He whispered under his breath, "Am I not good enough? Am I still a prisoner after all these years?" "You were never free," said a voice behind him. Theon turned sharply to find Jon Snow standing there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You talk like you belong here," Jon said. "But we both know neither of us really does." Theon bristled. "You've always hated me?" "No," Jon replied. "I just never pretended. I know what I am." Theon laughed bitterly. "A bastard." "Exactly. And you're a hostage who forgot he was a prisoner." The words hit harder than any sword. The next day, Theon did something he hadn't done in years. He wrote a letter to his father. Balon Greyjoy, ruler of the Iron Islands. The man who lost his sons and his pride in the rebellion. Theon's father, who never once wrote back. But now, maybe now, he would. "Father, they still see me as your son. That hasn't changed, no matter how much I tried to be one of them. I stood beside Robb Stark, trained with him, ate with him, but now they remind me what I truly am. A reminder of your failure. A guest in a cage made of snow and smiles. Let me come home. Let me be who I was born to be. Your son, Theon." He folded the letter and gave it to a raven in secret, not even telling Robb, not even trusting anyone else. What Theon didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Balon did receive the letter, and that letter was all the excuse he needed. Weeks passed. Winter began to deepen, and Ned Stark prepared to ride south to answer King Robert's call. He made arrangements for Winterfell's safety, assigning Sir Roderick to oversee the guards and Robb to begin learning the weight of command. But he did one more thing before leaving. He told Theon he wouldn't be riding with him. "I need you here," Ned said, "with Robb, but not as his squire, not anymore." That hurt more than anything. "You're saying I'm not good enough?" Theon asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm saying," Ned replied, "that you are not a Stark." And with that, the line was drawn in stone. That night, Theon sat alone once again, watching the fire. But he didn't feel warmth this time, only cold fire in his chest, a fire that whispered, "One day, they'll regret treating you like less. One day, they'll see who you really are." The raven took its flight into a grey sky, wings cutting through the cold wind that rolled off the north. Theon stood on the tower balcony and watched until it disappeared from sight. He felt something in his chest as it left, not guilt, not fear, just a tightness he couldn't name. In the days that followed, nothing changed on the surface. Robb still treated him kindly, still laughed with him when they sparred, still called him brother. But Theon knew it was different now. Not in the words, but in what was left unsaid. And the worst part? Robb didn't even notice. That made it worse. He truly believed they were still the same, that nothing had changed. But it had. Then, the raven returned. Theon found the black-feathered bird waiting in the rookery, tied with a simple message, sealed with black wax, the Kraken of House Greyjoy. His heart pounded as he broke the seal. "My son, the time is coming. I have not forgotten you. The Starks think they can leash a kraken, but they are fools. You have done well. Keep your eyes open. We will rise again. Prepare yourself. Balon Greyjoy." That was all. No warmth, no affection, not even a signature beyond his name, just orders. Still, Theon stared at the words like they were a treasure. He folded the letter carefully and hid it beneath a loose stone in his chamber wall. From that day, his eyes changed. He watched everything more closely: who spoke to whom, who controlled the guards, what parts of Winterfell were left unwatched during the day. He started asking quiet questions to the blacksmiths, the stable boys, even the washerwomen, not in a way that raised suspicion, just as a curious young man wanting to learn more about his home. Except it wasn't his home. Not anymore. One day, he stood at the highest point of the castle, near the old tower, and looked out across the cold north. "You really want to go back, don't you?" The voice behind him was soft. It was Robb. Theon turned, blinking. "Go back? To the Iron Islands," Robb said. "I see it in your eyes these days. You've been quiet, distant." Theon forced a laugh. "Do you blame me? Ever since your lady mother whispered something in your father's ear, things haven't exactly felt welcoming." Robb looked down, guilt flickering in his face. "She doesn't trust you. I didn't listen to it at first. Still don't, fully. But she says, you'll always choose your blood in the end." Theon felt his throat tighten. "And what do you think, Robb? Am I your brother or your prisoner?" Robb stared at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "I want you to be my brother, but I can't choose that for you." The words stung more than Theon expected. They stood in silence for a moment, wind tugging at their cloaks. "Why didn't your father let me squire for you?" Theon asked finally. Robb hesitated. He said it wasn't right, that he had to think of what message it sends to the north, to the rest of Westeros. Theon laughed bitterly. "Ah, so it was about appearances, not trust." Robb didn't answer. That night, Theon returned to his room and took out the letter again. He read it 3 more times before putting it back. The next morning, he requested to speak with Maester Luwin. "I'd like to study more about naval routes," he said casually. "The North has so few ships. If war ever came to our shores from the sea, we'd be vulnerable." Luwin raised a brow. "You think like a commander now?" Theon smiled. "I'm just thinking like a Greyjoy." And that was the first time he'd said it without shame. Days later, another raven left Winterfell. This one carried a different message, coded in a way only his father's men would understand. Theon used a phrase Balon taught him long ago, hidden in the words of trade and tides. "The wolves sleep soundly. The gates are watched less in winter. Soon I'll be ready." Winterfell remained calm, peaceful, but deep in its belly, betrayal had already planted its roots. And in the shadows of cold stone, Theon Greyjoy was no longer asking to belong. He was learning how to take. The snows fell heavier as winter settled deeper into the north. Life inside Winterfell moved on, as it always did, meals served, swords sharpened, the ravens flying in and out with news from all over the realm. But under all that normal, something darker had taken root, and it had a name: doubt. Robb noticed it first, though he didn't speak of it. Theon had always been cocky, smirking, laughing too loud, always trying to prove himself. But now he was too quiet, too polite. He asked questions instead of making jokes. And worse, he no longer challenged Jon during practice. He just nodded, stepped back, observed. Jon felt it too. One day, after training in the yard, he said to Robb, "Theon's different." Robb glanced over to where Theon sat by the armory wall, wiping down his blade with slow, careful strokes. "I know." "You trust him?" Jon asked. Robb didn't answer right away. He wanted to say yes. Theon had grown up with them. They'd hunted together, bled together, laughed over mead in the kitchens when the maester wasn't looking. But trust, that word felt heavier now. "I don't know," he finally said. Jon didn't press him. But that night, he began watching Theon too. Meanwhile, Catelyn Stark hadn't let her guard down. If anything, she kept her eyes on Theon more than ever. She never scolded him, never questioned him in front of others. But she noticed the small things: How he never spoke of the North in the way he used to, how he had stopped calling Robb brother, how he sometimes walked the battlements late at night, alone, eyes scanning the woods. One night she found him in the godswood again, standing beneath the weirwood tree with its red leaves rustling in the breeze. She stepped quietly, like a ghost behind him. "You pray to the old gods now?" she asked. Theon turned slowly. His smile was thin. "I don't pray. Just think, to what end?" she asked. He shrugged. "Isn't that what everyone's doing in this place? Thinking, waiting, preparing? You, Lord Stark, even Jon always planning for something." She studied him for a long moment. "You've grown clever." "I've always been clever," he said, a little too quickly. Catelyn stepped closer. Her voice lowered. "If you ever betray this family, Theon, I will know, and I will not stay silent." Theon's jaw tightened. "I never asked to be part of your family." "No," she said. "You just wanted the crown without the weight." With that, she turned and walked away, her cloak trailing behind her like the shadow of judgment itself. That conversation left Theon burning. That night, he wrote another message to the Iron Islands, shorter this time, just 5 words. "Strike soon. Winterfell is soft." And across the cold sea, Balon Greyjoy smiled when he read it. Weeks later, Robb received news that would change everything. His father had been arrested in King's Landing, charged with treason. It struck Winterfell like a sword through the heart. Robb stood still when the Raven's message was read. Bran cried. Catelyn looked as if she'd been turned to stone. The hall fell silent, until Theon spoke. "You can't just sit here," he said. "You're the heir to the North now. You need to ride south. Raise the bannermen. Demand your father's release." Robb looked at him, eyes wide with panic. "I don't even know if he's alive." "That's why you act now," Theon said firmly. "Don't wait until they send back his head." The words were harsh, but they were right. Later that night, as Robb prepared to send ravens to his bannermen, he sat with Theon one last time. Just the two of them, beside the fire in the great hall. "Will you ride with me?" Robb asked. Theon nodded. "Of course, to the end." But in his chest, that old ache returned, the one that whispered, "You're not one of them." And for a moment he didn't know if he was lying or not. Winterfell changed overnight. One moment it was a quiet, cold stronghold where days passed slowly, and the next, it felt like a shaken beehive. Servants ran through the halls, carrying messages and preparing supplies. Ravens flew in and out. The great lords of the North began sending back their replies. They would ride for Robb Stark. They would not let Ned Stark die alone in a southern pit of vipers. Robb walked the halls with a new weight on his shoulders. He wasn't just the eldest son anymore. He was the young wolf in the making, though he didn't know that name yet. He tried to stand tall, to look ready, but he was still just a boy pretending to wear his father's boots. Theon watched him closely. Sometimes he felt proud Robb was strong, brave, the closest thing to a brother he'd ever had, and other times he felt a sharp sting in his chest. That should have been me. A prince, a leader, someone whose name meant something. But here, in the North, he was just Theon Greyjoy, the hostage. Still, Theon helped Robb prepare. He gave advice, spoke with the younger men, trained harder than ever. Robb trusted him enough to bring him into his private planning room again, something Ned Stark had stopped doing. Yet even in those moments of friendship, Theon felt the distance. A cold reminder, he trusts me, but not fully. One evening, as the banners began to rise and men camped near Winterfell's walls, Theon found himself walking through the courtyard with Robb. "You'll make a good lord," Theon said, trying to sound casual. Robb gave a sad smile. "I don't want to be lord. I just want my father back." "That's why you ride to war," Robb nodded. "And you'll ride with me?" Theon hesitated for half a breath. "Yes," he said. Of course. But that tiny pause didn't go unnoticed. Jon Snow was standing behind them, sharpening a blade. He lifted his eyes just long enough to catch Theon's expression. A small frown tugged at Jon's mouth. He didn't say a word, but he didn't have to. That night, Jon spoke with Catelyn. "I don't trust him," Jon said simply. Catelyn looked at the fire, not surprised. "I warned Ned long ago, but the boys grew too close." "Robb loves him," Jon added. "That is what makes it dangerous," she replied quietly. "Love blinds." Meanwhile, Theon had slipped away from the busy halls and climbed the battlements. The wind whipped through his cloak as he looked out over the torches burning below. Hundreds of northern men setting up camp, hundreds preparing for war, and he wondered, what would my father think, seeing me stand among wolves? Would he call me a traitor, or a spy, or a fool? He was still thinking when a deep voice echoed behind him. "You seem troubled." It was Sir Roderick Castle, old, loyal, with a face cut from stone and a beard like grey rope. "I'm fine," Theon said quickly. Roderick stepped beside him. "Winterfell has been your home for many years, but men can have two homes, you know, two loyalties." Theon stiffened. "Is that what you think? That I'm torn?" Roderick gave a small shrug. "I think you are young, and young men sometimes forget that choices carve their futures." Theon looked down at the camps again. "And what if the choice isn't clear?" "Then you wait," Roderick said, "and pray the gods give you wisdom." Theon almost laughed. "The old gods never listened to me." Roderick smiled sadly. "Then maybe it's time you listened to yourself." But Theon didn't know which self. He was supposed to listen to the boy who grew up among Starks, or the Kraken's son who carried the salt wind in his blood. As the days passed, Robb gathered nearly 20,000 men. Winterfell buzzed with noise, smiths hammering metal, soldiers sharpening blades, lords shouting orders. And finally the morning came when Robb Stark would ride south with his bannermen. The courtyard filled with armoured riders, banners of the direwolf snapped in the cold wind. Theon stood mounted beside Robb, wearing a confident smirk, but inside he felt like he was standing between two cliffs. Catelyn watched them from above. Her eyes lingered on Theon. Something in her expression said she feared this moment, because she knew, deep in her bones, that taking Theon south was like taking a storm along for the ride. And storms never stay quiet forever. The march south began with the heavy sound of thousands of boots pressing into frozen earth. Robb rode at the front, young but determined, jaw tight, eyes forward. Theon rode close by, closer than most men, but not as close as he once had. Even Robb didn't notice the small gap that had grown between them. But Catelyn did. Jon had seen it too before they parted ways. The road was long and cold, stretching endlessly between pine forests and grey mountains. Smoke from the marching campfires curled into the sky every night, carrying the scent of wood and steel. Men told stories to stay warm, laughed over old victories, prayed for new ones. Theon listened to them all, smiling when he needed to, but never joining in. He was too busy studying. Studying Robb, studying the army, studying the weaknesses. He had grown sharper since receiving his father's letter, and the weight of those words still pressed on him. Strike soon, Winterfell is soft. But riding beside Robb, laughing with him again during training breaks, listening to his plans, suddenly the command wasn't simple anymore. Every mile south sharpened the knife inside Theon, but he didn't know which direction it pointed. One night, the soldiers camped near the banks of the Green Fork. The river rushed loudly in the dark. Theon sat alone, staring into the fire, when Robb dropped down beside him. "You've been quiet again," Robb said. Theon smirked. "I thought that was something your mother wanted." Robb shook his head with a tired smile. "My mother wants a lot of things. That doesn't make them right." Theon looked at him, studying his face, wondering if Robb truly understood the world yet. "You're carrying a heavy burden. Robb didn't answer. He just stared into the flames, shoulders stiff. After a long silence, he said, "I don't know if I'm ready for this war." That honest fear cut through Theon more than he expected. "You will be," Theon said. "Starks always are." Robb turned toward him with a soft, grateful expression. "I need you with me, Theon, not just as a companion, as someone I trust." Theon swallowed, his chest tightening. "You do trust me?" Robb nodded. "With my life." And those words, those simple words, felt heavier than any chain, because they weren't meant to trap him, they were meant to lift him. But Theon didn't know which they were doing. Later, when the camp slept, Theon walked down to the river. He took out his hidden letter, the one from Balon Greyjoy, and read it again. The cold wind whipped at the paper. "We will rise again." His father saw him as a weapon. Robb saw him as a brother. Which one was true? As Theon stood there, torn between two worlds, footsteps crunched behind him. He didn't turn. He already knew the sound. "Jon Snow." "You're restless," Jon said quietly. Theon gave a small laugh. "Is that your way of saying you're suspicious of me again?" "I don't need to say it," Jon replied. "You know it." Theon finally turned to face him, the moonlight reflecting off the water behind them. "You think I'll betray Robb?" Jon's face didn't change. "I think you don't know who you are. And men who don't know themselves make dangerous choices." "Dangerous for who?" Theon asked. "For everyone," Jon said, "including you." Theon felt anger rise, but underneath it was fear. Fear that Jon saw the truth too clearly. Fear that he was already walking a path he couldn't step back from. Jon stepped closer. "Whatever you're planning, stop. Robb believes in you." Theon's voice cracked. "And what about you?" Jon's eyes softened for the first time. "I want to believe in you. I really do." That hurt more than hatred, but neither of them spoke again. Jon left Theon staring at the dark river, his thoughts twisting tighter than ever. The next day, the march continued, and Theon rode beside Robb once again. But the storm inside him had grown, because now he wasn't choosing between the Starks and the Greyjoys. He was choosing the man he wanted to become, and he knew whichever road he picked, something precious would break. The banners of the north flowed like waves in the wind as Robb Stark's army reached the edge of the Twins, two great towers on either side of a river, connected by a stone bridge. The bridge was the only crossing for miles, and it was held by one man, Walder Frey. Inside his cold, narrow halls, Frey sat surrounded by sons, daughters, and sour air. Robb had sent an envoy first, but the reply had been clear. "The young wolf may cross, but not without a price." Robb was angry, frustrated. "He's playing games," he muttered, "while my father rots in a cell." Catelyn, who had joined the march days earlier, pulled him aside. "Walder Frey is always playing games. He's not loyal, but he's not stupid. Give him what he wants and cross before the Lannisters reach River Run." Robb didn't like it, but he listened. That same night, they entered the Twins. The deal was made. Robb could cross if he promised to marry one of Frey's daughters. Robb agreed, reluctantly, and the army crossed. But Theon? Theon didn't cross with the same ease. That night, before the army moved forward, he slipped away and found a quiet corner near the riverbank. The moon was high above, and there, waiting as promised, was a cloaked rider, one of his father's men, sent secretly. Theon handed him a message, his final message. "Robb is moving south fast. He trusts me completely. The north is nearly unguarded. Now is the time. Father must strike. Teat. G." The Ironborn rider didn't speak, just nodded, then disappeared into the darkness, taking Theon's betrayal with him. Theon stood there a moment longer, breath visible in the cold night, heart pounding like war drums. He had done it. He had chosen. And yet, It didn't feel like victory. The next morning, the army continued, marching hard and fast, trying to reach River Run before Tywin Lannister's forces could surround it. Robb led with fire in his eyes now. After crossing the Twins, something had changed in him. He gave sharper orders, rode harder, spoke less. He was no longer just Ned Stark's son. He was turning into a commander, and Theon rode beside him, all smiles. No one saw the weight in his eyes. No one except Catelyn. She watched Theon from a distance, always studying, always questioning, and deep in her gut, the unease grew. Later that week, the army finally met its first true clash, the Battle of the Whispering Wood. Robb had sent decoys south, tricking the Lannisters, and now, in the deep woods, his forces surrounded and crushed Jaime Lannister's vanguard. It was Robb's first real victory, and it was brilliant. Cheers echoed through the trees, Stark banners waved proudly. Robb returned with Jaime Lannister in chains. That night, a feast was held. Men sang, ale flowed. Hope filled the air like smoke from the fires. Theon stood by Robb's side, drinking, smiling, laughing. He looked like a man celebrating his friend's rise, but inside he felt hollow. He had seen Robb fight. He had watched him lead, command, inspire. Robb Stark had become something real, and Theon had sent a message to destroy it all. Late that night, Theon walked through the dark camp alone, away from the music and the noise. He found himself near the prisoner tent where Jaime Lannister sat in chains, staring into the fire like a lion in a cage. "You're one of the wolves," Jaime said when Theon stepped close. Theon raised a brow. "Something like that," Jaime smirked. "You don't smell like one." Theon frowned. "And what do I smell like?" "Salt." "And confusion," Jaime said. "You don't know which pack you belong to, do you?" Theon didn't reply. "You think you're hiding something," Jaime added. "But people like me, we know a traitor's face. You've already made your choice, and someday it'll eat you alive." Theon left without another word, but Jaime's words followed him like a shadow. Because he was right. The message was already flying across the sea. The ships would come, the Ironborn would rise, and when they did, Theon would have to stand on one side of the line. And whichever side he chose, he'd lose something that could never be taken back. Weeks passed. Robb Stark's war raged on in the south. More battles, more victories. He was proving himself as a true leader, bold, clever, feared. Lords whispered of the king in the north, a title no boy had held in centuries. And through it all, Theon rode beside him, speaking like a brother, fighting like a loyal man. But inside, Theon was unraveling. Every day that passed without a raven from the Iron Islands was another day of tension, fear, and shame. He kept wondering, would his father strike? Had the message even reached him? Was he still loyal in their eyes, or forgotten again? And worst of all, had he just betrayed the only people who ever treated him like family for nothing? Then, one cold morning, it came. A raven. No seal, no message written clearly, just one line scratched in harsh, jagged ink. "We come with fire and salt." Theon's fingers trembled. His heart dropped. It was done. The Kraken had awakened. His father had chosen war. That meant ships. That meant blood. That meant Winterfell. At the same time, Robb received news of another kind. His younger brothers, Bran and Rickon, were holding Winterfell while he marched south. The castle was lightly guarded. Safe, they believed. But Robb was worried. He wanted to send someone back. Someone he could trust to hold the north while he fought the south. At dinner, Robb turned to Theon. "I want you to ride north," he said. "Return to Winterfell. Make sure my brothers are protected. Keep the bannermen loyal." Theon froze. "You want me to guard Winterfell?" he asked slowly. "You know the castle," Robb said. You know the people. They respect you. You're not just a friend, you're part of this family." The words nearly choked Theon. He nodded. "Of course, I'll do it." But when he left the room that night, he felt sick to his bones. How could Robb ask him to do this? How could he still trust him? How could he send him home, just in time for the Ironborn to attack it? The next few days were a blur. Theon rode north with a small escort. His mind raced. Maybe he could stop it. Maybe he could ride ahead, warn the castle, help defend it. Maybe he could burn the message, tell his father nothing. But then another raven came. This one colder, meaner, direct. "The fleet lands soon. You will open the gates." He barely slept that night. When Winterfell finally came into view, it felt like a dream. The same tall walls, the same old towers, the warm smoke rising from chimneys. Bran's laughter echoed faintly from the yard, where he was being pushed in his chair. Rickon chased his direwolf with muddy boots. Theon watched them from a distance and felt his heart twist. They still saw him as a brother. And the truth was, a part of him still wanted to be one. Maester Luwin greeted him kindly. Ser Rodrik welcomed him with cautious respect. The people of Winterfell gave small nods and polite smiles. They believed he had returned to protect them. But at night, Theon sat alone in his room, staring at a candle burning low. The letter from his father lay crumpled on the table. "Open the gates. Strike. Win their fear." And outside those gates, not far away now, the sails of the Iron Fleet were cutting through the cold waters of the north. Theon had made his choice weeks ago. But now that it was time to follow through, he was falling apart inside. Catelyn had been right all along. Her warning had stopped Ned from bringing him in too close. It had created distance. It had made Theon feel like an outsider. And maybe that was the worst curse of all. Because if Theon had truly been treated like a son, maybe he could have stayed one. But now the Kraken had returned, and the wolves were sleeping. And in the silence before the storm, Theon Greyjoy stood at Winterfell's gates with trembling hands, knowing that the first man through them would be him.